Apple loves to ditch things, and this year we're ditching a lot. We're ditching the home button, and that includes Touch ID. So does the compromise of Face ID stand a chance against the classic fingerprint reader? Get ready for a biased opinion. So yes, if you are a defender of Touch ID and you don't see the point of Face ID, prepare yourself for a very, very biased opinion on it. You're going to be wasting your time if you think that Touch ID is better already. This is really just to give you my feedback on my personal experience. It's not necessarily applying to everyone because I am kind of an exception, and I will explain why. So I have this disease known as psoriasis. I apologize for saying that a lot. I know I bring it up, but a lot of people always ask me in my videos, what is wrong with your nails? Or why do your hands look so weird? It is because of this skin disease. It's a problem where your body makes more skin cells than it's supposed to and results in a lot of flakiness and ugly looking hands. And also a problem with this disease is that my fingerprints are constantly changing, which means anytime I try to register my fingerprint with any Touch ID sensor, I've tried it on the MacBook, I've tried it on the S8, I've tried it on the Pixel, I tried it on the Essential phone, and of course, I've tried it on the iPhone as long as it's been available. But as long as it's been available, it has not worked for me because my fingers always are changing, which basically means I've never really gotten to experience Touch ID. So this is what I mean by biased opinion. I'm not going to defend Touch ID very much because it literally has not been available to me. Now, I will do my best to try to understand the point of view of, okay, so for instance, Drew, what if you had good hands and Touch ID worked for you all the time? Which again is in fantasy world where that's not happening, but I'll do my best to compare Face ID to Touch ID. Now, some reviewers have had their hand on the iPhone X for quite a while now, so they've gotten to experience Face ID and use it for a while and formulate their own opinion on it. Some have mentioned the fact that when you're comparing Touch ID and Face ID in a standalone street test, you're literally just holding the iPhone 8 and the iPhone X right next to each other. Face ID technically might take a little bit longer to unlock because Touch ID can be configured so that as soon as it registers your fingerprint, it unlocks. And some people have been complaining about the iPhone X not necessarily doing that with Face ID, meaning that as soon as the iPhone X registers your face, it does not instantly jump to the home screen. You still have to take that step of swiping up. And I don't want people to get the impression that Face ID is a lot slower. And in fact, the reason I'm such a big fan of Face ID is the fact that I almost don't even notice it's there. Several times, especially when I'm tired or when it's dark at night and I'm just thinking, oh crap, where's my phone? I'll literally just grab it, I pick it up, and then I swipe up and it instantly unlocks. And I'm not even thinking, okay, register my face. Okay, unlock now phone. I don't even think about that. It's literally just felt like my phone is unlocked and there's no passcode on it. And I think that's the form of security that is the most secure. It's the most invisible. The fact that we don't notice it is the reason it's so effective. But again, there are other situations. I've seen some people get their hands on it early and say that when the iPhone X is in direct sunlight, it interferes with the sensors and is unable to unlock. And I was concerned about that because that's something I had with the Galaxy S8. Even when you're setting up the iris scanning on the Galaxy S8, it mentions that in direct sunlight, the sensors have a harder time registering your iris. So the infrared sensors maybe don't work as well. I was worried about that. So I did put the iPhone X directly in sunlight. I filmed it here for you a couple times and it never seemed to be affected by that. Holding it directly in sun and trying to unlock it, it still works just fine. And it's kind of interesting. You know when it's in direct sunlight because when sun is beaming on the Face ID sensor, you can see every single little notch in there. It suddenly becomes very noticeable wherever there's a sensor or a dot projector or an infrared sensor. Whereas, you know, when you're indoors and you're just looking at it, you really can only see the earpiece in the front-facing camera. Everything else just kind of looks invisible. But when you hold it in sun, you can see all these sensors. And I have noticed that in video, sometimes you can actually see the dot projector flickering. For those of you who haven't got your hands on the iPhone X yet, you don't actually see that. The sensors on Face ID are completely invisible, so don't worry about that. But I was relieved to find out that direct sunlight didn't really affect Face ID at all. And back when I tested the Galaxy S8, it definitely was affected by that. So that's another plus to Face ID. But I think the biggest warning I have to send out people with Face ID is that it's definitely a learning curve. You know, Face ID definitely does not work from like 180-degree angles. You have to be looking at it in a very specific way. And it just takes a little bit of time to get used to what the unlocking zone is for your iPhone X. I've discovered that at an average arm's length, it can still register you, which I think is the most common scenario. You're pulling your phone out of your pocket, you hold it up and you look at it, it unlocks. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm not even really noticing that it's going through this process. My thought process is, I need to look at something on my phone, I'm gonna pull it out, I pull it out and I swipe up and it unlocks. That's as far as my thought process usually goes with few exceptions. Usually we run into the big debate between Touch ID and Face ID when we start bringing up, what if your phone is resting on a table, it's resting on your desk. See, on the iPhone 8, you can just reach forward, put your finger on that Touch ID sensor, it unlocks. You didn't have to pick up the phone, you didn't have to do anything differently. It's not really facing at you, but you can still unlock it while it's sitting on a table or desk. This debate also comes up when we're talking about adding a fingerprint reader to the back of a phone instead of the front, which of course is very, very common in Android phones, and it appears that Apple is very much against that. See, when a phone's resting on a table and Touch ID's on the back, you have to pick it up to register it. And in a way, Face ID is very similar. You don't necessarily have to pick up your iPhone 10 to unlock it with Face ID if it's resting on a table, but you do kind of have to sit differently. I've noticed in a couple demo tries that if you get the angle wrong, it won't necessarily work. As in, if you're a little bit too low and you try to register, it won't unlock. So the common thing I've had to do is just kind of pull it towards me a little bit, and then you get that angle right and it will unlock. So this again is another situation in which Touch ID might be a little bit faster, a little bit more convenient because it doesn't involve me dragging the phone a little bit closer or having to actually pick it up. Now, in terms of Face ID and Touch ID actual unlocking speed, I do think it's safe to say in a street test, if you're just comparing actual speeds when both phones are as fast as possible and have perfect scenarios, yeah, Touch ID I think is going to be a little bit faster. It saves you a step of having to swipe up. It's possible they may add that accessibility feature in the future, but as of now, that is not an option. But what I do think Face ID is helpful for is the fact that it's designed for being a security feature that works beyond just unlocking the phone. Maybe this wasn't as common back when Touch ID was a thing, but what I found Face ID extremely helpful for is when you're trying to unlock certain apps or certain passwords. If you're like me, you have to remember so many different passwords for so many different apps. You've got your Apple ID, you've got Netflix, you've got your Google password, and those all save an iCloud keychain, but to access them, you typically need to unlock a certain portion of your phone. If you don't want to use Touch ID or Face ID, it asks for your passcode. But with Face ID, the fact is when you're opening the app and you're trying to log in, you are already looking at the phone itself, which means that when I open an app and it's like access iCloud keychain, it just activates Face ID really quick, verifies that it's me, and then instantly activates the password and login information. I didn't have to rest my finger on a Touch ID sensor. I didn't even have to move. It just instantly turns on, activates, checks, and makes sure it's you. This is also very handy in the Apple Store app. And there, oftentimes, if you want more order information, you have to sign in. And for the longest time, we've been signing in with Touch ID, or if you want to buy something with Apple Pay, you have to reach down and register your fingerprint on the fingerprint sensor. Whereas with Face ID, because you are already using the app, because you are already holding the phone, the unlocking process for within apps itself is very, very seamless, and it works very, very quickly. This is where I think Face ID actually has the upper hand. The fact that it requires no extra steps when you're unlocking passwords or apps, because basically Face ID works at every orientation you're typically using your phone. If I'm just going for a pure measurement test, in my experience, I can get Face ID to unlock when it's about 1.5 feet away from me. But once I reach the 2-foot mark, it has a bit of a harder time reading me. So if I leave it on a table and my face is really far away, like I said, about 24 inches away, I'll be a little bit too far and it won't be able to register, but I just have to move a little bit closer and then it will unlock. And same has gone for Apple Pay. Like if I'm in line waiting to get to the front of the store at a McDonald's or something, I'll usually be on my phone just waiting because I know what I want to order. I get up to the register, I order and everything, and I still have my phone out like this. And when it's time to use Apple Pay, I just double tap the side button. It activates instantly. I don't have to reach down and make sure my fingerprint reader catches my fingerprint because my phone's already open. It's already pointed at me. And then I just hold it a little bit closer to the reader and boom, we're done. So it's not to say that Face ID is better than Touch ID in every single way, but it's important to keep in mind that it's built for a very different kind of device. Touch ID is still being implemented on modern Apple products. It's 2017 and they introduced the iPhone 8 and the iPhone 8 Plus, and both of them still have fingerprint readers and they're on the front. Apple acknowledged that if they wanted to make a phone that has a bezel-less display where the entire front of it is all screen, they couldn't put Touch ID underneath the display, not just because that technology is difficult, but also because Apple was trying to move away from having buttons on their phone. For the sake of efficiency, and I'll talk more about this in my iPhone 10 review, I think it's been extremely intuitive that they use gestures instead of buttons. Buttons you interact with, but they're not necessarily for looking at. That's why most of the buttons on your iPhone 10, in fact all of them, are going to be on the side because you don't look at the side of your phone. Since the front of it is all display, it wastes no pixels, it wastes no space on buttons where the only purpose for them is to be clicked. I didn't think I would like not having a home button, but as I've been using my iPhone 10, I realize how logical it is to rely solely on gestures because gestures don't require to take up any more space on the screen. Apple wanted to make sure that with the iPhone 10, every bit of display was taken advantage of so that your content looks amazing, and it sure is doing a good job at it. And I think that's why Face Face ID fits the iPhone 10 mold very well. Apple's not interested in adding functionality and sensors on the back, having you pick up things or having you reach behind or trying to feel for the right sensor. They're not into that, and I'm glad they're not. They think about things differently. You know, every other Android developer seems to think that that's the way to do it, and it works. Touch ID is by no means a bad way of logging in if you have working fingers. But like I said, at least in my experience, it has never worked for me, and I'm sure that there's other people out there that I've actually met who have said that for some reason their fingers don't get registered correctly. And I believe that Face ID works for a wider demographic of people. And I'm sorry if you have an identical twin, you know, that you can't win them all. But I think the majority of the population doesn't have identical twins. And if they do, they probably can keep their phone far enough away from their identical twin and they don't have to worry about that sort of thing. iPhone 10 demand is high enough, okay? We can lose the twin market. So in my experience, at least, Face ID is definitely the winner, if you couldn't guess. And I'm really looking forward to seeing them improve it and implement it on more and more devices in the Apple ecosystem, as I could see it working extremely well on both iMacs, MacBooks, iPads. The idea of just being able to look at the product and have it unlock securely, I think that is the future. And I'm more than okay with Apple ditching Touch ID on the rest of their devices, because it doesn't work for me, and I do think it's more secure, especially for more scenarios, more than just unlocking. If we're just talking about unlocking the phone, I think, yeah, Touch ID does a pretty good job and it's pretty fast, but Face ID applies to, I think, more scenarios, you know, unlocking passwords and Apple Pay, it's faster. And of course, it fits this bezel-less design easier because we are not yet ready to start embedding Touch ID sensors underneath the display. And even if we could do that, it would be an extra step that is not necessary. It would take up room on this gorgeous display that is being used with gestures, and I think that's a more efficient way of using your operating system. And of course, I'll get more into that in the actual review. We're not there yet, but brief update on the iPhone 10. It is going very well. I have not enjoyed an iPhone upgrade this much, I think, ever. I think I've been more excited for this one and been so pleasantly surprised with the experience of the 10 than I've ever had before. Of course, if you iPhone 10 owners are out there, let me know what you think of yours in the comments below. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you in the next one.